All right, now we got the father-son tandem here, Indy and Dagen Walton. Thanks for being on here.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Good to be here.
So we were just talking off the air a little bit about hockey and what was it like coaching hockey, or what is it like coaching hockey in Alaska? Because I think maybe people assume that Canadians and Alaskans are really big with hockey, but really Alaska is a basketball state. So how is it coaching hockey and traveling and all that?
Yeah, hockey. Yeah, I grew up in Fairbanks up north, and there really wasn't a whole lot to do other than to play hockey. The winter months were long and they were cold. My mom would drop me off at the outdoor ice rinks like on Saturday morning, like at 10 o'clock in the morning, and pick me up at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And everybody would show up and skate. And all the schools in Alaska at one time had ice rinks at 'em out at recess, and so that's where I learned to skate was, like, in elementary school. I didn't even have any skates. I'd go to the skate room and check out a pair of skates and go ice skating, and so, Alaska is a big, big hockey state. We breed a lot of really good hockey players, and once they get good, we kinda ship them out of the state because in order for them to take it to the next level, they gotta be seen, which is better to be seen down lower 48, and there's more teams to play against, and so a lot of them will go out to play juniors or college or ACH hockey.
Mhm. So when did you move from Fairbanks to Soldotna?
Well, the day I graduated from high school, the next day I left.
Mm.
I was commercial fishing in the summers on Kodiak Island from the time I was 9, and so I didn't have the summers in Fairbanks, which I hear are really nice, warm, 90 to 100 degrees. Usually, there was a little snow on the ground when I left to go fishing, and when I came back from fishing, there was snow on the ground. So it it made for, Fairbanks just being a place of memories of lots of cold weather. So I left there, that was in 88 when I graduated, so
Mhm.
and in
Oh,
Soldotna, I went off to college, and when I came back, I actually moved back to Soldotna or to Soldotna. I heard a lot about it from some guys I played hockey against in college. I heard lots of good things just over the years about the Kenai Peninsula. That was a great place to raise a family and lots of recreation, lots of, fishing, lakes and ocean and rivers, mountains. And so I ended up convincing my wife that this was the place that we were to raise our kids and start a family.
mm.
So that was in 1997, early 97. So
So your family had already been into the commercial fishing game at that point. Was it always a kinda travel to go do it? Or how'd
yeah,
the family get
yeah.
into it?
From Fairbanks is interior Alaska. The Kodiak Island is south central, below south central Alaska, and in the Gulf. So it's quite a chore to get there. And it was, I was fishing there with my grandfather. He had a Cessna 185 on floats.
Mm.
And so we would leave Fairbanks with his airplane and, fly all the way down there. By the time I was like 12 years old, I remember one time he would, fall asleep sometimes. And so he'd be nodding off, but normally we would fly from Fairbanks all the way to Homer and refuel, and then from Homer, go all the way to the south end of Kodiak to our camp and land there. Well, I was about 12, I think, maybe 13, I don't know. And my grandfather was showing me some things, how the airplane works, and he'd already shown me many times. But he basically told me to keep this needle pointed right here, which was our elevation and altimeter, and then he said, "And keep this needle, which was our directional gyro, pointed right here, and wake me up if anything happens." And so we got through Hurricane Pass, and that's when he told me all that. So really, it wasn't a whole lot of trouble I could get into. But the problem was is I wasn't looking out the window. I was watching those gauges, and
Mhm.
I'd watch one gauge for a while, and I'm keeping the elevation up, and then I look over and I'd be off on the other, so then I would correct and come over. So anyway, I was flying this S curve all the way to Homer. Well, luckily he woke up after a little while and he looks up at the fuel gauge on each wing and he taps on them with his finger and he's like, "Man, we're a lot lower on fuel than what we should be, you know?" That's because I took the river miles, you know? And, so we actually had to land in Wasilla at Lake Louise or Lake Lucille, whatever that was, and, refuel there, and then go on to Homer and refuel again, and then down the Kodiak. And so and over time, I got a little bit better at keeping the airplane straight.
Yeah. Shoot. That's awesome. So what type of, fishing were you doing down there? What was the did you own a boat? Were you fishing someone else's boat, lease a boat? And then was it gill netting or seining or what was it?
So I my mom and stepdad, we beach seined for 1 year when I was 9, and then, my grandfather, my uncle owned a set net operation in Alitac Bay, and so I started set netting with them. So we had about 5 little skiffs, about, 16, 18 foot long, and we had 4 permits and about 8 sites, and we would go out and literally from day one, my grandfather made me run the tiller, put me right on it. My grandfather didn't know that I was actually absolutely terrified and paranoid of drowning. I'm not a good swimmer. I still am not a good swimmer, and I always had that fear. But he put me right on the tiller, and all he did is stand in front of the boat and kind of point which way to go, you know. And so I learned real quickly, where the reefs were,
Hmm.
how to navigate in the waters, and he also taught me, at nighttime when it was dark, because we were fishing around the clock, you'd watch behind you. You'd watch your phosphorus trail because the prop would stir it up and you'd have this nice green glowing trail comet behind you. And so you knew by watching that when to turn right, when to turn left to avoid the reefs and make it back to camp safely. And it was a little harder in the fog in the dark,
Hmm.
but I got really good at navigating. Number one, because I was absolutely paranoid of drowning. So I got really good at operating the boat. And by the time I was, I think, 18 years old, my grandpa actually put me in charge of the whole camp. And
Hmm.
I had crew members that were older than I was, but I was always good with just common sense decisions. Partly because my grandpa would lecture me every day, and that it got so he lectured me so much that I would start numbering them. And so when he'd start on the lectures that I'd already heard, I would tell him, "Hey, Gramps, this is number 205. I've already heard this one 3 times." And he's like, "Well, I'm going to tell you again." And he would tell me again. And luckily, he was very wise, and I listened to him.
Mhm.
I took his advice at a very young age. I grew up really fast. Obviously, when you spend 3 months of your summers, which is your boyhood time to play, working. I mean, when my grandpa got up at 5:30 to go fishing, I was up at 5:30. When we went to bed at 2 a.m. the next day, that's when I went to bed. Is when he went to bed. I mean, I was always by his side. In fact, they called me Gramps Junior because I was always next to him, and I dressed like he did. I followed what his advice, and you know, kind of mimicked, and just he was a good role model, the best father figure a guy could ever ask for.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of interesting too, because in high school I started dating, and I'd have a girlfriend, and this was before the internet and cell phones and everything else. We had to write letters, and out there was no electricity. There was no phones, there was nothing. Really remote part of Alaska and a remote time. And anyway, so I would leave after high school and go fishing, and I would often wonder what my girlfriend was up to, and I would come back, and usually it was at church. The first Sunday I'd come back, go to church, and the next Monday would be school. But that Sunday at church, all my buddies would come up to me and they would spill the beans that my girlfriend was now somebody else's girlfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that went on for a long time, until I met my wife Stephanie, and I got back from fishing and she was still there. I hurried up and proposed to her because I knew she was the one. She solved that test.
Yeah. What was the the regulations and the hours in the season like back then? You said that you were pretty much fishing 24/7, but, like, what was the catch? And then just kinda what was that like?
Yeah, so the it was Kodiak was an amazing place back in the '80s. Much like Kenai and the Cook Inlet, they had big sockeye runs. You know, we had a, 1,000,000-pound season, but we were catching all species, primarily sockeye, probably 25, 30% sometimes, maybe even 40 sometimes, humpies or pinks. The chums were a big portion of it, and then sometimes, my grandpa would stay late into September. Like when I was in college, we would stay. He'd have me stay as late as I could, and we would stay and fish silvers. They got a really nice silver run down there too. We would catch the occasional king. Not very many kings were coming through there, but occasionally we'd catch a king. So primarily, it was just all salmon. Back then halibut was the 1 day fishery, and everybody would gear up, and it didn't matter what the weather was. You had to do it on that day, and people were dying all over the place because they were loading the boats up, trying to catch as many fish as they could in a short 24-hour period, and trying to get that quota done. And so IFQ really, really revolutionized that fishery. And we'd done a little bit of that halibut, since it was just kind of a 1 day, 2 day thing back then. But it was all salmon. And so in Kodiak, the tide, you don't have the fluctuation of tides like you do in Cook Inlet or Bristol Bay. Your nets don't go dry. They stay in the water all the time, and they're deep. They're 45, 35, 40 feet deep. And they're also, each permit you can fish, 900 feet, and so 150 fathoms of gear per permit, basically. And so, you'd put your net out. Almost always it was like a minimum of 2 or 3 day openings. And when the fishing was good, they would just keep extending and
Hmm.
extending and extending. Sometimes you get a 5 day or 7 day extension. It was always nice to hear that, because then we knew we didn't have to pull all those nets, which was always a big chore to do. We had to pull them by hand. We didn't have any power
Mhm.
rollers or tools, to do that. And so my shoulders and my arms got really big and strong, which helped for my hockey game. But it definitely made me who I was.
Mhm.
And then being in those little skiffs out there bouncing around when you'd have a storm and stuff, you know, that got really challenging. A lot of life and death situations. People today will say that Indy's he's the calm guy in the storm, and part of that is because I've been through some pretty ugly, situations. Most storms that we go through in life, they can be challenging, but it's not every day you are facing life and death. And so, there's a lot of jobs out there that are pretty darn easy after,
Yeah, yeah,
going
right.
through those jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's a whole bunch of different ways that those situations can impact you, and sometimes because people have been through a lot of things, that creates an arrogance, and they're always kinda on the edge, and it kinda make people nervous. I have a couple of commercial fishing buddies down here that they talk about, that boat or that captain, and it seems almost inevitable. They make other people very, very uncomfortable, and other people, when you are through a lot of those experiences, it makes you more humble. So you are confident in your abilities, but you're very, very humble. You don't think that you've completely mastered the outdoors and the wild, because it is what it is, and once you get too full of yourself, that's when things can get hairy.
That's when it gets bad. And I've seen Mother Nature off of her meds, and it can be really terrifying. And so even to this day, and part of it still just that fear of drowning, that it's really made me to be one of the best captains running a boat when it comes to the safety of my crew, and then also being able to assist and take care of other people. I've lost count how many boats and how many people I've saved from sinking or drowning, or even resurrected boats that did sink. So many people's lives I've been able to help, save from drowning. And so I'm humbled because Mother Nature, I thought I've been through the worst storms, and I didn't think that, I could be in a worse storm. and it seems like these storms are getting,
Mm.
you know, more terrifying. The wind's blowing harder, the waves are rolling differently and come from different direction. The polar ice caps melting has caused the weather front to move. What normally was on the chain has moved it above the chain and coming right through Bristol Bay where we fish today, making these storms more hellacious when they happen and coming right through Lake Iliamna and right into, Cook Inlet. And there's a lot of beach erosion and things that have happened because these storms that are happening today. So yeah, Mother Nature will keep you humble. In fact, it's kind of funny. One time I got into a discussion with an atheist about whether there's a supreme being in the universe, and I told him I believed there was a God, and he told me there wasn't, and I said, oh, I think you do believe there is, and he's like, no, I'm an atheist, I do not believe. And I'm like, you need to come fishing with me, because when you come fishing with me, you'll be praying to somebody.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. When it gets ugly and stormy, I tell you what, man, it humbles everybody,
Yeah.
and they're going to be praying to somebody.
Yeah. When did you make the switch from Kodiak to Bristol Bay?
So I started doing both in about, let's see, 19, when was it? 90, no, yeah, 91, 92. I was going back and forth. I bought into Bristol Bay in 92.
How much did the permit cost?
Back then it was a set net permit, and I think I paid 40 or 45,000 for it. They eventually dropped down to about 8 or 10.
Hmm.
And now they're about 70,000 for that same permit. But yeah, so I was going back and forth. My grandfather wasn't really participating in the fishery anymore, but my uncle was, and so my uncle would have me come open up his camp, fish early June, and then I'd fly over to Bristol Bay and fish there. And as soon as I was done there, I was back on a plane back to Kodiak to finish up the season there with him. So, but then it was probably about 90. Oh, that was about nine. That wasn't very long. 94, 95. I stayed in Bristol Bay. I ended up getting married, and Dagen was born in 93, right, Dagen?
Yep.
And so, being gone for 3 months just wasn't fair to my wife, and it was hard on me. I wanted to be with my son, and my daughter Bristol was born, and so, you know, Bristol Bay became the ideal fishery because of how short and fast it was.
Mhm.
And so been there ever since now.
Was there anything about the Kodiak fishery that made you think this might be tapering and Bristol Bay might be the future, or was it those other things? Because at that point,
Y-
I don't really remember
Yeah. So
Kodiak. There wasn't really a
man,
collapse or
Kodiak
anything, but
just had some banner years back then, and gosh, we just like we just, I mean, to fish 3 months almost consistently, day in, day out, that's a lot of fishing. I didn't notice. Well, it was like early '90 when I was tapering, going back and forth. Things were slowing down in the early June fishery. But once I got over to Kodiak or to Bristol Bay, I really didn't look back, other than I stayed in touch with my uncle, and we would compare notes after our fishing season, how we each did, and so in time, it didn't take very long before I was catching more fish in 4 or 5 weeks than he was catching in 3 months. And unfortunately, Kodiak has really fallen flat from where he is down there, and now I'll catch, sometimes more fish in a single day than he will all summer long.
wow.
So yeah, Bristol Bay has just completely, it's always been good, but it's really blossomed. Give credit to the, fish and game biologists and the management of it all. And, Bristol Bay, it's just an amazing place, the best place on earth to have a fishery like that and to sustain a fishery.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's amazing the changes there. I was fortunate. It was really kind of dumb luck that, I went to Bristol Bay and it was a short season and I stayed there, and to see what it's become today and to see where Kodiak was and where it is today.
Mhm. So when Dagan came along, when he was 5, did you get him on the tiller right off the bat, or were you hesitant
Well,
about getting him into
I
commercial
think he was
fishing?
actually in the boat before he was 5. I can't remember. I know that he was the youngest and probably still is the youngest permit holder ever in the state of Alaska. I don't remember what the regs are. You have to be like 10 or 12 years old or something like that to have a permit in your name. And I think Dagan, do you remember how old you were?
No, I was 6, and I think Michelle Recoff had to get the exact same exemption that I did, and she was around 11. So I don't know what that age was. Maybe it was like
Yeah,
14 or
it
something.
might be 14 or something. I'm not sure what that is, but yeah, Dagan was a permit holder age 6,
Hmm.
and he was crazy. I can't remember if his first season was when he was 4 or 5, but I would put him in the boat and,
I was 4, 98, summer of 98. So I would have
yeah,
turned 5 in December of that year.
so he'd go fishing with me and, sometimes it would be storming and it wasn't safe for him, and so I'd put him on shore and man, he'd get his own rain gear on and be down there at the boat and he would be crying. He'd be like, "Take me with you, Dad. Take me with you." And I would, it was harder because I'm like, it's too rough out, son. You can't go, and not till you get older, And then I'd go out there, and he'd just be sitting there on the beach, just wishing he was out there with me, and he just longed for it. And anyway, we documented him in the boat fishing, day in, day out, and we went to the state of Alaska when I bought my second permit, and I said, "I want to buy this permit and put in my son's name," and told them how old he was, and they're like, "Well, he's got to be a certain age unless you can document that he's really participating in the fishing." And I said, "Well, I can document that. That's no problem." And I had videos, I had pictures, statements from people, and Dagan was unique in that he was the only time he wasn't in the boat was when I deemed it too dangerous for a young boy to be in the boat.
Hmm.
That was the only time, which was, probably maybe 3 or 4 days of a 30-day season,
Hmm.
and he loved it. He was hooked, and of course his name Dagan. My wife Stephanie and I, we were trying to figure out what do we name our son when we found out she was pregnant. And we had suggestions from family members, and we'd come up with a couple names. And anyway, I was looking through this name book, and I came across this name Dagan, and it said "Little Fisherman" in Norwegian or "King of the Sea." And I closed the book, and I just said, "That's his name, Dagan." And it's really stuck with him because he has taken the fishing to another level, from the sport fishing to the commercial fishing, at what he just lives and breathes. It was pretty cool to see, live up to his name.
Mhm. What type of boats were you running at that point? You were doing the skiffs in Kodiak. Where did you upgrade your boat for Bristol Bay?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I went to Bristol Bay and everybody's pulling sideways, pulling their guts out, and by the end of the day, they'd have their skiffs full. I was set netting to begin with, but they would start and they'd pull their boat sideways into the waves. They still do this, a lot of them, and they'd pull their boat sideways into these waves, and the further they get out there, the more fish they would have on board, which was more weight they were pulling, and they'd have, usually, 4 people in a skiff. And so, I went out there and tried that way of fishing, and I was like, "No way, man, this is ridiculous." And so I I took a design that my uncle had and made it a little bit better and built a skiff that had a roller on the front and the roller off the back. The back was off of one side and the engine was off one side, so the engine wasn't in the middle. And I would run that fish. Both those permits was just Dagan and I in the boat,
Hmm.
and we could pick more fish faster than 4 people in a boat operating the same amount of gear. We'd catch more fish, we'd be done before them, and we weren't tired because the fish came right through the boat, right to us. Pick them and drop them into our brailer bags, and off the tender we go. We never pulled anything.
Hmm.
And So we kind of revolutionized that a little bit. There's a lot of skiffs like that I designed. In fact, I built 4 or 5 of them and sold them. I'd have. In fact, it was kind of funny. It was the women that were the smartest ones. The guys were, I'm just gonna keep pulling, but women would show up and watch me on the beach and see how effortless it was. And you already got an engine there, and might as well use it. And I would, every other season, I'd have some female set netter that would be begging to buy my boat. And I really didn't want to sell it because I really liked it, but I felt kind of pity for them. And so I would sell them a boat, and they became really good friends of mine. And then I would go next winter and have another boat built and change a few things, tweak a little things, and then just keep coming back with a new boat all the time. And then in time, there was a lot of other boats that, were built just like it,
Mhm.
with the same concept of using the motor to drive through the net underneath it and have the fish come right to you.
Mhm.
And it definitely makes it a lot easier. So,
Bristol Bay is kinda known for kinda crowding. You look at pictures, or videos of a lot of boats, maybe similar to the Sac Row in Sitka, but just massive fleets of boats everywhere. So how has that kind of changed, especially as technology's changed?
it's still that way. It's crowded. I think we have really too many boats, to be honest with you. Right now, we've had great fishing season, so everybody's been catching fish. But if we were to go back to, catching the fish that we were catching in the 90s, there's gonna be a lot of fishermen that are gonna not make it unless the price goes way up, because you've got to, with what the Bristol Bay Borough charges in their property tax for your boat, with the fish tax that you got to pay, with all the gear, the crew, the expenses, the insurance, the boat storage. You got to catch almost 80 to 100,000 pounds just to meet expenses.
Hmm.
So it's definitely a lot more challenging. And if we go back to where, you know, well, you know, I think last year the average poundage was like 130, 40,000 pounds. But, you know, it'll be hard for a lot of these people, especially the new guys that have bet everything on a new boat and are in debt right now. They may have a real challenge coming at them if we cycle back down to smaller runs.
Mhm.
So, but it's still pretty crowded. I fished in the days in the river set netting, and they had us set netting with the drifters, and I happened to have the number 3 and 4 spot in the river. And well, it didn't take long for the number 1 and number 2 spot got knocked out. The drifters come in and put their nets out in front of them, tangled up, and broke their lines. And so all of a sudden, everybody's coming into the beach, and so I would race out as soon as they tangled up on me. I was just cutting their nets left and right. I remember one time I cut like 13 boats at one time.
Mm.
And anyway, he's got a really good memory, and for the longest time after that year, I think that was '96, he would say he would remember the boat and the name, and he's like, "We cut their net, Dad. We cut their net." He's like, he knew every boat nets that we ever cut, and so eventually they because of the conflicts between the two gear types, they would alternate. I went three drift tides to one set net tide, and well, that was really tough because here I was, I felt like one of the best hockey players in the game, and the coach won't put me in the game, and so I'm sitting there on the beach watching all these drifters fish, and I couldn't. So I went and bought a drift permit and started drifting in my skiff. And so again, no power rollers then, and we couldn't drive under that. We had to round haul it in by hand, pick it as we went, and the skiff could only hold so many pounds. And those drifters didn't like me in there because I could just get in, get out of the skiff right on the beach, put my net right in the shallowest of shallow water, and come out and really hold that little hook in there and catch some fish. And they would come by full board, giving me a 4 or 5 foot wave, and so I'd have to have a long, line and sit there and just, be ready to turn on a dime to put my nose into a wave that was coming at me, or dodge a boat that was gonna run over me. They didn't see me, and so that got really challenging. They also, I think there were some drifters too that might have got upset at with that I was able to fish both. I'd get, basically go from drifting to set netting. So then they passed a rule that you couldn't operate your set net permit and your drift permit in like a 24-hour period of time. Well, that was real easy. I'd put the permit into Dagen's name or another crew member's name or my daughter or somebody, and so then we would just operate that way. So
Mhm.
we'd have the two set net permits in mine and Dagen's, and the drift permit in Bristol's name, and then so we would just drift that way. And so that got really crazy, and only did that for 2 or 3 years, and ended up buying a drift boat. The boat was called the Taiga at the time, and it was a single jet, and it was a herring skiff, basically, wide open platform, and it went 6 knots with the tide and about 1 or 2 knots against the tide. But we were pretty much fishing right in the river. It wasn't that big of a deal. So I would get off the drift boat, get back in the skiff, go set netting, get off the set net, go back in the drift boat, and just around the clock, doing both. Eventually, the Kodiak started making its comeback, and then they opened the bay back, and that was I kind of got used to the river. That was really nice. Tenders were right there, markets were right there. It was a lot calmer than the open ocean. But we ended up deciding at that point that I'd keep the set nets. I was partnered with my mom at the time too. She had 2 set net sites and permits, and then I had my 2. And so hired my cousin and other people, and so I kind of would train guys from afar and talk to them, teach them how to do it, and then I was always kind of drifting around the sites and stay close by in case they needed any help. And so I had all of a sudden, I had 2 crews. I had a crew on my boat, which was mostly my kids, and then I had a crew on the beach, which was a lot of my family, my nieces and my nephews that were involved with the fishery too.
Mhm.
I repowered that boat and put 2 Cummins engines in it and 2 jets, and we went from doing 4 knots on flat water to 30 knots. And so we were one of the faster boats at the time, and we could really maneuver really well, being able to pick over the nose, and if we wanted to set over the stern or whatever, could set out on step. And Dagen was my best fish picker that I had. He could pick fish. We give him the whole bow. The whole bow was his,
Mm.
and then I'd have 2 or 3 people behind this bar, and they got to share this tighter space. But he could pick more fish than those guys could in that space. You got to give him the space because he was all over the place and fast. But he could pick a fish without touching it, and just by it was hanging in the net. He could just grab the net and shake it one way, shake it back the other way, and pop it out, even though the fish might have been 2 or 3 feet away from him. Or sometimes he could use his foot. He'd have his hands on one fish and kick the net with another one and pop a fish out. And but then the day came that I decided I wanted to build a better, faster, safer boat, and so I built the boat that you see in the background here,
Mhm.
Sniper. And I told Dagen, I said, I think it's time for you to run a boat. And how old were you, Dagen?
22.
22. And yeah, you're Bub's age. So, and he's like, I'm not sure I want to do that, Dad. I want to keep picking fish. And I said, yeah, you're the best fish picker I've ever seen, but you can't do that forever.
Mhm.
It's going to wear your body out. And I said, and because you're a good fish picker and you love it, you really need to run a boat. And so set him loose on that, showed him a few things, played around a little bit, and then he learned a lot of trial and error stuff too on his own. Probably had some stories that I don't even know about that he's probably never going to tell me. But
No, you won't
um,
find out.
but I operated that 5 years, I think.
4.
4 years, and did really good with it. For the platform that it was. And then one day he says to me, Dad, because I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to see my catch compared to his catch, even though, sometimes I had 2 permits, or eventually I had 2 permits and he had 1. but he would say to me, "Dad, if I had a boat like yours," which my boat was, when it came out, it was phenomenal. I mean, it was revolutionizing Bristol Bay. I mean, we were, this boat was one of the first few boats that could get on step with 10,000 pounds.
Hmm.
And I actually have a memory where I think it was 2017. I caught about 10,000 pounds down on the Johnson Hill line. Dagen was up by our cabins fishing off the set net sites up by the mouth of the river, and he called me on the radio. And he's like, "Dad, those fish are backing out of the river. You get up here." And I was like, "I got 10,000 pounds. It's going to take me an hour at least, to maybe two, to buck this tide and get there. The fishing will be over." And so that was the last he heard of me. And then about 10 minutes later, here I come running up the beach in shallow water in like 8 feet of water on step. And I flew right up there to the mouth of the cabin, turned the boat, laid my net out on step, and caught this guy off that I wasn't happy about. But he came over to me after I got the net out, and he saw my boat come up, lay the net out, and then he saw the boat sink down into the water and knew I had some fish on board. And he comes over, and I thought he was upset with me. I thought he was gonna chew me out. And he's like, "Can I ask you how many pounds you have on board?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, I'm not sure if I broke 10,000, but I know I'm over 9,000." And he's like, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen," you know? And so I was grateful for that. And that, golly, I caught another 4 or 5,000 pounds at the end of that tide. So that really, really changed things, really. And then, a lot of people took notice of that, and pretty soon everybody's building, buying these new boats.
Mhm. Did
And
you
so
any
about,
sort
yeah,
of
but Dagen, oh, go ahead.
proprietary stuff or patent any of the designs, or do you just kind of build what you wanted to build and then go with that?
Yeah, so I was looking at buying a used boat, and I went down to Seattle, and I went over to the Kodiak boats. They were building these three really nice big boats that could do the same thing, and to some highliner fishermen. And I looked at that, and I almost went with them, but the price tag was super high. I mean, we're talking, $1 million boat in 2017. And I just thought that was just a little too spendy. I went over to another boat builder. I'm trying to remember the boat builders, Megan, the prop guys.
Can't think of
Um,
it.
Remember Ty Finn's buddy up in
Oh, Maverick.
no, Mavericks boats. Yeah, I went over to Mavericks boats, and I really like. They had a jet one that was really nice, and really liked the interior. And it was a little smaller than those Kodiaks. Those Kodiaks they're like big, big, boats. They're like big sails too in the wind. That can really make it harder to fish. So I looked at Mavericks, looked at those really hard. I went up to Bellingham, and I was looking at this boat, and somebody put a sticky note on my window of my car, and said, "If you want to see a better boat, come give me a call." So I called the number, and it was Tom Aliotti, and he had been building some boats and really trying to experiment. And Tom's an excellent fisherman, fishes down in Kodiak. And so I went over, and he was building this boat, and he was working on the back of it. And my wife was with me, and I'm looking at the boat, looking all around it. I didn't really like the design completely. There was a lot of flaws. I thought, it was too narrow. There was the cabin space. I wanted a day bunk up top, and so I started talking with him, and he was trying to get me to build a boat. And I said, if you make these changes, and I gave him a list of changes there. And then I also told him how to build his trim tabs in the back because of the experience I had with double dipping the boat that Dagan had run. We really had to work the trim tabs and the whole, planing surface that you can have in the back. It's like 17 or 18 inches. That really, really was what made double dipping a really good fish killing machine. So I told him how to build those, and so he did that, and he made all these changes to his design, and he also had input from other people too that were telling them, but he took a lot of those suggestions and he came up with the design of Sniper, which is the boat in the background. So this was he built three. He welded the boat. His crew welded my boat up, and then I took it with the welded hull to another group of people in Bellingham, the Colony Wharf guys, Phil Erickson and his crew, and I hired them to finish it. So Phil was kind of like the MC guy. He knew the hydraulic guy and the electrical guy, the finishing guy, and anyway, they did an amazing job. We got insulated wall-to-wall carpet with this really fine African wood that does really well in the moist environments. We went with stainless steel hydraulics. The boat is really probably one of the, if not the nicest alloy boat ever built, just from the finishing touches and stuff. It's a beautiful boat. It really is. Still to this day, it's a beautiful boat,
Mhm.
and it's a performing boat. It's a real fish killer. And so, Tom, he, he wouldn't, share his design with anybody. He was selling boats, anywhere from 3 or 4 boats a year. And so I went to him because Dagen came to me after 4 years of fishing on double dipping, and he said to me, he's like, "Dad, if I had a boat like yours, I could easily catch 50,000 more pounds than what I'm catching now." And I said, "Well, the sooner we get a boat like mine for you, the sooner you'll catch 50,000 pounds we should get after." And he's like, "All right, let's do it." And so I called up Tom and I told him I wanted to build another boat, but I wanted to build. And he's like, "Well, I don't usually do that, but because you helped with the design and you were one of the first guys, I'll sell you the cut file, basically a cut out package." And so he sold me a package and we shipped it up to Homer, Alaska, where Daigle Boat Works welded the boat up. And then we shipped it to my shop in Soldotna after he was done welding it. And Dagan and I went and fabbed it all out to fine tuned a bunch of little things that we didn't like about Sniper that we wish we had. And so we made a lot of just small changes in different places that made the boat even better. Turbo's a little bit lighter of a boat than Sniper, and so they can get on step with 10,000 pounds in deep water. And they can get on step with more than that in shallow water. But it was pretty cool. He and I and our family, but mostly Dagan and I would leave work. I'd go coach hockey, 3 o'clock. As soon as hockey was over, and Dagan was with me too, coaching hockey. We were over there working on the boat and working till midnight, 1 or 2 o'clock every night. Working Saturdays, Sundays, all day long, from like 10 o'clock in the morning till 1 or 2 o'clock in the next morning. And we did everything on that boat. I had seen the guys at Colony Wharf build Sniper and took a lot of notes, and what we didn't know how to do, we called them up and asked them how to do it. So we did everything on that boat. We hired a guy to do the hydraulics because that's beyond our capabilities. And we were running a little behind schedule, and we got it down to Homer like June, like 17th or 18th, right before the fishing season, and we had to drive it around the chain, and we hadn't even sea troweled it yet. We sea troweled it, and we had our buckets control cables were backwards, so on one engine was forward, it was actually reversed. Throttles were backwards on one, I think, too, or something, and so it made it a challenge to get past the sea trials. And literally, we had a storm coming, so we literally left like the next day. We didn't even have a GPS hooked up. And so I'm underneath the steering station while Dagan's motoring out of Homer a couple hours. I'm underneath there wiring up this GPS so that we could, find our way to Bristol Bay around the chain. We got that hooked up, found out we were off course about 15 degrees, and turned left and got going on step, and we got the Chignik, and it was raining cats and dogs, and that storm was setting in, and we didn't have a radio set up. So I drove through the whole night. So when we got to Chignik and refueled, we had like 7 or 8 barrels of fuel on the boat. Dagen and our crew member jumped up on the roof in this sideways rain, hooking up antennas and running cables, and hooked up the VHF, because I'm like, we need to have some way to communicate in case something goes wrong, you know. And so they got that all hooked up. Well, I caught a couple hours sleep, and once they were done, they come in, they're soaking wet. We untied our lines, and around the corner we went, and we actually made that trip. I think it was like 3 days, not too much.
That's fast.
Yeah, and all the way to Bristol Bay. That boat just ran flawlessly. Amazing. It was just an amazing platform. Yeah, he had bigger jets than I did as sniper, and once I felt the power of those bigger jets, I actually took sniper back here to Soldotna. We cut the original jets out and put the same 340 high thrust jets that Turbo Dagen has. I got the same jets, so I can try to keep up with them now. So I couldn't let them, outperform me. So.
Right. So
Yeah. So now he's been running that boat. This is what? This will be your 5th season?
Upcoming will be.
Yeah.
So looking forward, what's the future? You complimented the management of the fishery, but if we look 10, 15, 20 years down the road, what are things looking like? Dagen, are you pretty excited about the future? Do you think it's going to be sustainable? Are you not sure? What are your feelings?
The trends would say yes. The last 5 to 10 years is we've seen increased run sizes or sustained large run sizes, with the occasional pop that is exceptional. And yeah, I think that the management has done a really good job. I think that there was some mistakes made 20 some years ago that they've learned from. My dad mentioned how we fished inside of the Naknek River, and that was largely in part to the Kodiak River not getting its returns. And there was some management that I think kind of learned from mistakes that now we've seen sustained runs in most of the rivers. Not to say every run's perfect, but yeah, I think it's been trending really strongly.
Mm-hmm. What about the permits? Have they scaled back on the amount of permits? Are the amount of permits the same? How have the openings changed? All those things.
Yeah,
the openings are the same.
Yeah, and the permits are a finite number. There are a handful of permits that were actually only lifetime permits. They're only good for the lifetime of that person. You can't transfer them. There's very few of those, just a handful. So, the permits are still the same number. So the one thing that has changed over the years is they allow us to stack permits. So on a drift boat, you can have 2, which will give you, 150 fathoms for 1 permit, and then you get an extra 50, an extra shackle for 2. So we're fishing 200 fathoms on our boats. And, so the more, for every permit that gets stacked on a boat, you're taking 100 fathoms of water, 100 fathoms of net out of the water. Basically 1 less boat and 100 fathoms less. So it's kind of like a fisherman's buyback program. The problem is it's expensive. You have to be able to buy that second permit. And the second thing too is right now, the way the regulations are, you cannot own 2 permits in your name. And so if that were to change, where they would allow to have 2 permits in the captain or owner's name, you might see some more of these, 200 fathom boats, which would actually help in those lean years when that are going to be coming some point. Then there'll be less web in the water, which means the web that is in the water will have a higher average catch. But it's kind of interesting. It's all really economics. So we saw permits go up to, I think, $250,000 here.
50.
A few years ago, 2022, I think is where we saw those, and partly because we had a really good price, we had really good runs, and the record 80 million run. And then we saw those permits fall flat down to 120,000. That's when we actually bought a second one for Dagen's boat. And so, it's really kind of economic. If the price of salmon if we were to get paid, in my opinion, a price similar to what we got in the '80s, inflation proofed. You know, if we could get $3 or $4, $5 a pound, well, it would actually make more sense for me to split my permits up and hire another captain to run another boat and put 150 fathoms of gear in the water and try to catch more fish. Because then maybe it would pencil out, to justify that, to hire that captain. Right now, it doesn't pencil out, so it's better to have that second permit on my boat, even though it only gives me 50 fathoms more.
Hmm. So what about I wouldn't call it a transition to the lodge life. I think Dagan referred to it as you wanted a family cabin, and there just happened to be 10 acres and a small lodge that's been there for a little while available. What made you want to get into that?
It's kind of funny how that whole thing evolved. Now you look back. When I bought double dipping and we were fishing the river and we had that single engine that would only do 4 knots, we in order to repower it we had to get it back to Homer. So we jumped in it. Dagan and I. Dagan was like 14 years old, I think 13 or 14, and we hit the Kodiak River and started driving up it. Luckily, we caught the current. When we got to the braids, here was this completely crystal clear water, gravel bottom, and I had my polarized glasses on, and I could see fish everywhere. I could see sockeyes, I could see chums, I could see pinks, I could see dollies, I could see rainbows. I could make them out, and I'm driving the boat. Of course, at that point, I was probably doing 2 or 3 knots, so I'm not going very fast. And Dagan had his little closed end Mickey Mouse reel, and I told Dagan, I said, "Hey, throw your rod, throw your lure over here. I see some fish." And so I didn't even stop the boat. He was fishing from the boat while I was driving upstream through the braids, and he was catching these tiny little rainbows, on a little Mep spinner. And he'd catch them and take them off, and drop them back in, and he would just throw upstream, and he was just catching fish while I was driving. It took us a long time to get through there because there the current was starting to pick up, and I didn't know the course to go, and we had to back out and try a few different ways. And then when we got to the last stretch, which is right before the lake, that's the fastest water, and we were going backwards. We actually weren't making any ground, and I wasn't sure we were going to make it. And so I moved the boat all the way over to the bank and tried to catch a little eddies and tried to read the water best I could. And so literally that stretch of water, I don't know what, Dagan, took us an hour, maybe two.
It took us right around an hour probably to go a quarter mile. That's
I
crazy.
mean, it was about the same speed as a one-handed guy in a wheelchair going, and it was what it felt like. It just wasn't going anywhere. So we got a really good look at the land, and I look over at the village, Iggy, and there's one of the skiffs that I had built and sold to a good friend of mine named Sherry Nelson. And I was like, wow, I haven't seen that skiff in ages. I wonder if Sherry still has it, and if she's there in Iggy. I didn't know where she was. And so we finally made it to the lake, and from that point, I was like, man, I gotta have a cabin out there. We got to go back there and sport fish that, because every chance Dagan and I get, we're always sport fishing when we get home from commercial fishing, and so that's all we talked about for a long time was getting, we just wanted a piece of land to build a small cabin on that we could sport fish on. And well, Facebook came out, and I got a Facebook account, and all of a sudden I get a friend request from Sherry Nelson. So I connected with her and found out she was in Iggy, and I just begged her. I said, "You got to find me some land out there for sale." I said, "I got to have a place," and we just fell in love with it, and we took double dipping back twice. So we basically, 2 trips upstream and 2 trips downstream with that boat, and just really fell in love with the whole braid, the beauty and the fishery and the crystal clear water. And Well, there was really nothing for sale, you know? And then one day out of the blue, she sends me a message. She's like, "Hey, there's this old lodge that was built in the '70s right across from the village that just came for sale." And, well, I took a look at it, and I was excited, but at the same time, it was a little high priced, especially for somebody who doesn't have the time to go operate a lodge. And so I made an offer on it contingent upon our inspection, and I go out there with my 2 boys, Dagan and Dylan, and we were talking to the owner of it. Her name is Marge Hagan, and, come to find out, she had, 2 adopted daughters and that she was from Fairbanks, and I went to high school with her daughter, Michelle.
Oh, wow.
And so we spent the night the first night, and we caught fish at midnight when it opened up right off the beach. Yeah, it was amazing. First cast, our my son Dylan, who's never fly fished before, his very first cast, he catches like a 23, 24-inch rainbow right at the stroke of midnight, you know? And so we got pictures and everything, and then I went out and my first cast got a fish, you know? And we got pictures, and then Dave went out and he got a fish, you know? And so we were already excited. Well, the next day we went downstream, found a little spot, and we stayed there all day long, never left that spot. And we caught fish after fish and just fell in love with the braids. And so I told the boys, I'm like, you know, one of the reasons I brought you out here was not just a father-son, you know, fishing trip, but this place is for sale and I'm thinking about buying it and I've made an offer. So I need to know, you know, what you guys think. Dagan immediately just said, "Buy it, Dad." He goes, "This, I love this place. Fell in love with it a long time ago, and I just want to be out here sport fishing every chance I get, you know." And well, my other son is smarter than Dagan and I combined, probably. He, saw things a little more rational, you know, and partly because at the time he wasn't as passionate about, you know, sport fishing like Dagan and I are. And he said, "Dad, this place has got a lot of work." He says, "It's old. It's got, you know, some issues. You know, the construction, to get construction materials out here and labor and everything out here, that's a challenge. And you don't have the time to do it." He was going to do it, you know, and man, all the reasons that Dagan gave me to buy it were all great reasons. And all the reasons that Dylan gave me to not buy it were all valid, great reasons. And we did it anyway.
Yeah.
And we're really grateful that we did. Number one, we love the area. Number two, we love the people. The village at Kodiak, they're like extended family. It's the neatest village in all of Alaska. It really is. Educated leaders, you know, that really want to, you know, protect the lands, protect their way of life, you know, and they're just good people, really good people. And so we're really happy to be their neighbors today. And we've done a lot of things in conjunction with them, hosting culture camps and guide academies and things like that. You know, Dagan's all about young kids and young men. And so Dagan's, I don't know how many culture camps, 2 or 3 culture camps and 2 guide academies that you've hosted?
3 culture camps and 2 guide academies, yeah.
Yeah, so Dagan's been the guide for that because I don't have the time to do it. And, you know, he's all about making a difference in the lives of the people in the watershed. You know, he's become best friends with some of the people out there, and it's neat to see that. It's neat to see, to give back and to help, you know, people that are less fortunate than we've been. You know, less privileged, I guess I should say, or something. So
Down here in Ketchikan, we're going to get probably 1.8 million tourists off cruise ships during the summer. So there's obviously a bit of, for some people, it's conflict. For most people, it's just this, not really a balance. Maybe it's a trade-off. So without the tourists and without the cruise ships, we wouldn't be able to have the economy that we do and the nice things that we have. So it's a community of around 15,000 once you include all the outlying areas. So we have days where we double our population in town. So some people are very anti-cruise ship. other people kind of get it, other people want more. What's the attitude in that region about some of those lodges? Because you're having, outsiders that are coming in to, quote unquote, catch our fish. Obviously, catch and release lodges are functioning way differently than lodges that are, just stacking fish. Others, people are taking what's legal and they're taking that home with them. That's fine. So is it kind of a lodge by lodge basis when it comes to the attitude towards them? Is it inviting because it helps the economy, or is it kind of mixed?
I
I
think
think
it's
that it. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Dave.
I think that it is definitely lodge by lodge. I think that they see how we choose to either respect or not respect the land and the resource and the people that live there, and you create a name for yourself in that regard. We have gone out of our way to try and show our appreciation for the river and the land and for our friends in the village. Like my dad said, they've truly become some of our best friends and they feel like family. And so I think that it is definitely a lodge by lodge and what you do will follow you.
Mhm.
I think it also it's area by area too. Since we are, we don't see those kind of numbers, not even close to it. Our lodge, I think we can host, close to 30 people with our outbuildings and stuff. We don't want to,
Mm.
you know, we don't want to. We want to fish ourselves, you know. So we have a DIY program that's pretty big, and Dagan's got some maps. He'll go over and show them where to fish. He'll guide them for a day, maybe two, and let them set them loose to do their DIY program. And sometimes it ends up guiding them again towards the end of their trip and stuff, just to help them out and teach them the area. But we don't want to be that busy. The lodge for us is, it's our happy place that we can go there. We can share with others teach them how to fish on a small scale, make a big impact, and get our fix as well. And so that's really what we're about. And so hosting things like the culture camp and the guide academy, those are really cool things because they're educational things, and they're a way to provide a service and give back, and to help, try to instill, the love of fishing that we have. In fact, it's kind of cool. When we bought the lodge, my wife kind of rolled her eyes like, you don't need another business or another project to get into. We need to simplify our lives, not complicate them, and so I think it was, I don't know, year 4 or something, we were hosting the second guide academy, I think during COVID, I think, and
That was the first guide academy, yeah.
our first one, okay, first one, and we were having a tough time because of COVID, and I asked my wife if she would go out there and help, cook and clean and do things during the guide academy and help with the COVID situation. And well, she was a little reluctant. Well, she went out there and, other than the bugs, the mosquitoes and the gnats and no-see-ums, she fell in love with the place. And she had a young native boy take her on the when they have a day in the life day where the kids become guides. This young boy took my wife out fishing. What was his name, Dagan?
Cameron.
Cameron. Cameron, yep. And took my wife out fishing, and for the very first time in her life on a fly rod, she actually cast and hooked and landed her first rainbow all
Mm.
by herself without, any assistance from me or Dagan. Dagan's a much better teacher than I am. I don't really have the patience, and I just want to fish, right? And so it's really cool that here we were trying to provide a service, hosting the guide academy, and one of the biggest impacts of that guide academy was on my spouse, and now my wife absolutely loves it. She paints her fingernails so they got spots on them and stripes just like the rainbows. When she holds
Nice.
the rainbow up, you can't see her fingernails because they just blend right in. And she's caught some awesome fish, and just had some great memories with us out there.
Mhm. When's the best time to fish there?
I'll let Dagen answer.
Depends. It depends what you want to get into, but I would say fall. I mean, the fish are bigger. There's more food in the river. The opener can be really fun though because those fish haven't seen anything in quite some time, so they can be pretty aggressive. But
When's
they're
the opener?
leaner. They're coming out of their spawn. Just what's that? Sorry,
When is the opener?
June 8th.
Okay.
I can tell you when
June 8th.
not to go. Yeah. When did we go out there? February that one time?
Yeah, it's open in the winter too. And yeah,
Oh,
we were
right.
out there to go get something ready for the culture camp with
We were excited. We were taking a lady from Bristol Bay Native Corporation out there to show her the place, and she wanted to go out at that time of year. So we're like, well, we don't
a day
recommend,
early, and
but
it
we
was
did,
not
and
good fishing.
we stayed a couple days, and we went downstream and fishing. And one of the first casts, I caught a rainbow, and we didn't catch another one for 2 days, and we froze our tails off. Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend February or March.
What about fishing in the lake? Do you head up there, do any fishing there, or just stick to the river because it's so much better?
Stick to
No.
the river. The lake is massive.
Mhm.
It's really big, but we do have plans to try and get into the lake. We're building a family boat that will be capable of getting into that lake and taking advantage of it.
Yeah, nobody really fishes the lake because it can, that fresh water with a little bit of wind, and you get that east wind, it can get nasty fast and dangerous. So Dane and I worked for 2 years with the same designer that designed the commercial fishing boat in the background, Sniper, which was Tom Aliotti's designer. So we worked with Sean Digitano. I think I'm saying his last name, Digitano, and we designed a 40-foot catamaran with a landing craft front on it that's 15 feet wide, and Sean dubbed it the Indy Cat. And so we're calling it the Indy Cat. However, that's just the model. We're actually got a name picked out for it, which is kind of funny because when Dagen was really little in the set net skiff, one day, I don't remember how old he was, but there was a lot of work to do and I needed his help, and he was kind of dinking around, and I told him to quit his dilly-dallying, and he started laughing at me. And I'm like, what's so funny? It's like, I've never heard that term before. And I'm like, what, dilly-dally? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, that's what you're doing right now. You're dilly-dallying. So get back to work, and well, so we talked about what do we name this boat, and that's number one on our list to name it is Dilly Dally, because that's really what we want to do with it is Dilly Dally. But it's built to, we could go and troll and fish that lake, being a catamaran that's 40 foot, 15 feet wide. It's all welded up right now. A Sergeant Boats out of Homer have done an amazing job, Ivan and his boys, and we're excited to get it up here to Soldotna, to where Dane and I will, in our spare time, we should probably call it spare time, is what we should call it, Dane, but we'll finish it out, and get it. And then our goal is to bring it out there and, explore and take people out and do something nobody's ever done. Maybe
Awesome.
catch the lake monster. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a huge lake. It's like 1,000 square miles or something like that.
It's about 90 miles across,
Jeez.
and
Yeah,
we've been on it where it's flat calm, looks like the Caribbean, and a couple hours later, it looks like the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, undocumented water. You don't know. One moment you're in 300 or 400 feet deep, and next thing you know, you're going over a mountain peak, and you're in these waves, and it looks like Loch Ness monsters out there as these mountain peaks start popping up out of nowhere, and next thing you know, you're in 2 or 3 feet of water. And so it can be pretty dangerous. There's been many lives lost on Lake Iliamna, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, in closing here, what would you closing thoughts either about commercial fishing, about Bristol Bay, about preserving the land, about the lodge? What do you got for a closer?
Well, we're all about sustainability. Dagen and I, our family, we're all pro development, but we're also, more about sustainability. So the Pebble Mine is probably the biggest concern that I have, because that's just, unfortunately, there's a lot of minerals out there, but it's just in the wrong place. It's such a fragile environment. The actual ground elevation is like 300 feet above sea level, and it's all wetlands. It's all marshy and wetlands. And, they're talking about building the largest man-made dam on the planet in an earthquake zone, and have all these toxic tailings go into it. And, I'm afraid for the future, if they could find some way someday to, somehow harvest those materials and process them somewhere else, or do something that wouldn't, if they can guarantee that there would be no harm come to the salmon, maybe I'd consider supporting it, but I can't, not the way it is. It's just, why give up a limited, why take a limited resource and give up a renewable resource? It just doesn't make sense to me from a financial standpoint. Bristol Bay has been, since the beginning of time, Pebble Mine has got a finite amount of resource, where Bristol Bay is an infinite amount of resource. It's sustained and managed correctly, and if we can keep any natural disaster, or not natural disaster, but any man-made disaster from ever happening there, it'll continue to go on for generations, long after Dagen and I are gone. So.
Mm-hmm. Dagen, what do you got?
I think you just need to come fish with us, Jeff.
Yeah.
I think you should come out and have fun with us, and
on the house.
Get out there.
Why not?
Yeah, get out there, lay your eyes on it, get a rod in your hand, and yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it might be a difficult time getting rid of me.
Yeah.
Tell you what, you'll fall in love with the place. Absolutely fall in love with the place.
Yeah. Well,
bring your bug hat
for a cabin. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for being on here. Really appreciate it. It's awesome to hear about different areas of the state. It's such a massive state, and things vary so much from southeast to Kodiak area to the Bristol Bay. So I really appreciate your time and coming on here.
Yeah, we called our lodge Last Cast Lodge, and it was kind of a funny story there behind it. But literally, that's where I want to have my last cast, is there. That's my favorite place to fish.
That's nice.
Hey, thanks a ton, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Please share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.